Good evening, this is Quintus Curtius again, and this is Fortress of the Mind. And tonight we'll be answering another question I received by email from a reader, as always, and this is a pretty good question. He says, "Hi QC, I'd like your thoughts on something. Let's say a friend of yours is upset. Say he just had a bad breakup or lost his job. You can see the pain in his face. Do you, 1, ask him what is wrong, / let him know he can vent or whatever, or 2, pretend to ignore it, thus letting the man keep his dignity?" Anyway, I'd like to hear your feedback. Great work, by the way. Thank you. All right. Well, this is a good question. And I guess it comes down to deciding how to best handle a situation when you see or where you see a friend is suffering. All right. Now, I'm going to answer this pretty quickly. This, to me, is a pretty easy question, at least as I see it anyway. Option number 1, okay? And let me explain what I mean about that, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail about why I believe what I believe. One of the obligations that you have of friendship is, as I see it, is sincerity and honesty. If you can't be sincere and honest with a friend, if you can't speak your mind, if you can't create a condition where he can speak his mind, then you really don't have a friend. What you have is a glorified acquaintance, really. And one of the sad things about modern society is that men are very hard-pressed these days to talk to each other about serious issues. There's a lot of this superficiality I noticed in relations that men have with each other. They can get business done when they have to get done, but when you really want to open up to a real friend, when you really want to say what you want to say, there's often this real hesitancy to really speak your mind. And I'm not talking about sensitive personal stuff, like really, really, intimate details about various different things, okay? Although it could be that. I mean just basic things, opinions about subjects, opinions on events of the world. The mainstream media has succeeded so well in destroying the concept of friendship between men that guys have become very, very hesitant, I think, to open up to each other, to talk about things with each other, because every time they do that, there's this fear they have of, oh, well, am I going to look weak? Am I going to look gay? Am I going to look like a dork? Am I going to look like this or that or whatever? And there's all these barriers, man. There's all these barriers, and guys worrying about the implications and complications and all this other nonsense. And that's really what it is. It's just nonsense. All right. My view of friendship is that you should at least be able to talk about the minimum details. You should be able to go to a friend about it for advice. Okay. Now, there's certain subjects I think that are probably very sensitive and almost off limits, I think, even among friends. But this, to me, is not the question that this guy is asking is not that sensitive. And there's a real deficit of sincerity out there. In modern culture, modern society, you see out there in the media, celebrities, internet, personalities out there, everybody is blathering. Everybody's talking a lot of nonsense. Everybody's speaking from the rooftops. But there's a real lack of sincerity. What you have is just excessive marketers, excessive screamers, chest beaters, braggarts, big mouths. But what you really don't have is a lot of sincerity, a lot of actual considered, honest emotion that comes from a position of sincerity, where you're actually trying to help somebody do something. You're trying to help someone solve a problem. So, my opinion about this situation is, if you see a friend and he's hurting, you're not doing him any favors by just papering it over. You're not really doing him any favors by just pretending it doesn't exist. All right? So, yeah, I think you do have some sort of basic obligation, if this guy really is a friend of yours, to intercede and to try to inquire about what's bothering him. Okay? But again, the devil is in the details here. It's all about how you do it. Everything is about how you do it. And this is where there's such a thing as finesse and tact that comes in. And this is something that can only be learned with experience. It's something that can only be learned with experience, because when someone is maybe guarded and sensitive and hurting, they're not going to really want to open up very much. They're going to want to protect themselves from further wounding. If you've got an open wound and it's showing to the world, the last thing you want is for someone to put a finger in it and twist that finger around. But if it's done in the right way, people will really appreciate it. People will really appreciate it. And I've had the same thing happen to me once. Many years ago, I was in a situation where I had gone through something that was reasonably traumatic. And that's when you really find out who your friends are. That's when you really find out who your friends are. A lot of my friends avoided me, were not willing to broach the sensitive issue. But I had one guy that did. He actually said, hey, I just wanted to give you a call. Thought you might be feeling down. You want to come out for a drink? Let's go out for a drink. It was no big deal on the surface of it, but it meant everything because it was sincere. It came from a place of sincerity. And I always remembered that. I still to this day remember that, and I'll always be grateful for that. And I think that if you were to take this step with this friend of yours, I think he would remember it also. I really think that he would remember it. So that's the first point. And in a lot of ways, this question that you asked reminds me of a passage, or reminds me of a part in one of Seneca's books called On Benefits. In Latin, it's De Beneficiis. And this is Book 2, Chapter 6. And staying with the idea of not, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Basically, he says it's the manner in which things are done that's important. He says you can gain a lot by acting quickly, by acting swiftly, and much is lost when you delay in things. Okay, and Seneca uses the examples of javelins and swords. He said a sword or a javelin weighs the same amount whether you jab it swiftly or whether you jab it slowly. But it's going to penetrate much, much further if you swing it quickly. And that's really the thing to keep in mind. It's all about how you wield the weapon. Okay, so that's I think the first point that he makes. And another point that Seneca makes that I think is maybe even more subtle. He uses the analogy of how delays are bad when it comes to friendship. He basically makes the point that just as prolonging an execution or prolonging a punishment only adds to the person's discomfort and pain, so also prolonging the granting of a benefit can hurt someone as well. If you see someone is hurt, if you see your friend is in pain or is hurting, and if you delay in that, if you postpone the granting of relief for that problem that you observe, you're prolonging the torture. Okay? You're prolonging the torture. So there's an implicit duty in friendship to act swiftly and not slowly. And it's funny, in this context, Seneca quotes a poet. He doesn't give the author of the poem. He doesn't give the author of the quote. But essentially he says, and this is On Benefits, Book 2, Chapter 5, he says, the more delay that you use, the less gratitude from me I will give. The more delay, the less gratitude. So delay and gratitude are proportional. And the other reason why you want to act swiftly or quickly, it's an indication of sincerity. It's an indication of the fact that you want to help. Because if you delay in something, the implicit message that is sent is that you really don't want to do anything. And that really is something to keep in mind. The more time that you waste in bestowing the benefit, the less of an indication of friendly intent that really is. And what's great is Seneca has a great, well, the original here, there's a Latin epigram here that's very succinct, as Latin always is, and it's a very, very good summary of this idea. It's tardavelle nolentis est, and that means not wanting something is equivalent to wanting something late. In other words, when you are doing something late, when you want something but in a tardy way, a late way, that's equivalent to not wanting to do something. So it's a nice phrase there that tardavelle nolentis est. You know, it's a very, very nice phrase, and basically it says that to want something late is to not want it. So remember that. Remember that when you're talking to your friends, or when you're dealing with this friend of yours and you're concerned about his pain. You should ask him about it. But here again, like I said before, the devil is in the details. It's all about how you do it. How do you broach the subject? And that's really something you're going to have to really figure out for yourself, because every person's personality is different. Every friend has a different set of receptors. Everyone keys off different things. But I think as long as you're sincere about it, even if you trip and stumble in the broaching of the subject, he's going to know. Okay? Again, sincerity is everything. Sincerity is everything, and I really, the older I get, I believe that so much. Because, as you go through life, you're going to find out that you're surrounded by insincerity. You're surrounded by fakeness, by fraud, by nonsense, by bullshit, by noise, by distractions. And on those rare circumstances when you encounter sincerity, it's very nice. It really restores, I think, a lot of positive energy to the universe, and I really think it's something that you'll appreciate more and more. And I've gotten to be very, very good at detecting it for whatever reason. I was always a pretty good judge of character and personality and things like that. But one of the things that, if there's one thing that I am proud of, I think it's, as I've gotten older, it's that my ability to hone in on personality types and to evaluate and to instantly size up whether a person is sincere or whether they are not. And it's an important skill. It's a very important skill. I think being able to judge character, being able to evaluate people is a critical skill. And you've got to be observant. You've got to be able to pick up on both what is said and what is not said. So, with this friend of yours, reader, I think what you do, if the situation, I don't know if the opportunity has passed yet, but if the situation ever comes up again, you just phrase it in a direct way, and you do it in such a way that you preserve his dignity. I would not do it, obviously, with anyone else around, and say, look, hey, I noticed, you seem to be kind of feeling a little bit down. What's going on, man? What's the situation? And if he doesn't want to talk about it, if he doesn't want to get into it, that's fine. At least you tried, and he'll remember that. Just like I remembered it when I told you that story at the beginning of this podcast. So those are my thoughts. Those are my ideas about it. I think when in doubt, if someone really is a friend, I think you owe it to your friend to try to make an effort to find out what's going on with him or her in their lives. Again, the same thing applies, boyfriend, girlfriend situation. Everybody wants to know that you care. Everybody wants to know that you care, because there's a real deficit of caring in the world. Really, people just don't. People are so busy now. People are so preoccupied with their own nonsense, and they're so caught up in their own heads. They don't even have time or inclination to really ask about how the other guy is doing. And if you can be the one that does that, you can make a great impression. You can make a great impression, and you can really add a lot of good feeling to the relationship. And in previous ages, people did this all the time. People did this stuff all the time, man. We were using the example of Seneca, and he also wrote a series of consolations, consolation essays to people that he knew. basically it's almost it's a sort of a forgotten literary genre. The consolatio in Latin is the consolation. There used to be a whole genre of writing which came from the Greeks, where when you had a friend or a relative or a loved one, when they were in pain or they suffered, say, the death of a loved one or a wife or a spouse or a brother, sister, whatever, the writer would write an essay to them, like a long letter, basically explaining to them why they should try to comfort themselves and why they should take solace. And a lot of these consolatory essays followed a certain boilerplate pattern. They talked about why, why maybe the person has now deceased is in a better place, why we should not attach ourselves too much to the transitory things of this world, and why we have to maintain our balance and our moral center and our positive energy so we can get on with the struggle of life. And it's a forgotten literary genre. Nobody really writes consolation essays anymore. Maybe they should. Maybe it would be a good idea. Maybe I should. But it's nice to read them. And Seneca wrote 3 or 4 of them. I can't think. There's one, there's Consolatio ad Helviam. There's another one to Consolatio ad Polybium, to the writer, a guy named Polybius. I forget exactly who he was. And there's another one that I just can't remember off the top of my head. But there's either 3 or 4 of them from Seneca that have survived, and they're worth reading if you're into Seneca, if you like his stuff, which I think anyone who's interested in Stoicism probably owes it to themselves to check out sooner or later. So anyway, my point is, the idea of writing a consolation is, I think, evidence of the fact that in previous ages people cared a lot about each other, about their friends, and maybe that's something that's been lost in the world. I'm not advising that you write letters to people about this stuff. I think it's sufficient in today's social climate simply to ask about it and leave it at that, but the point, I think, is well taken. So that will conclude our podcast here for tonight. I'm Quintus Curtius. Good night.